afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Felice Franklin, and I'm the co-founder of the P.R.I.D.E Book Club, and P.R.I.D.E stands for People Reading for Inspiration, Discussion, and Enjoyment. And we just celebrated our 21st anniversary. So we are very excited about having Brooke Stevens with us today, and we will be discussing her book, Men We Cherish, African American Women Praise the Men in Their Lives. And as I indicated, books will be available at the end of the program for sale. And Brooke has been in the financial services industry, and that's how many of us knew her, but she also did some writing that was outside of being in the financial industry. So Brooke spent 20 years on Wall Street as an international banking, a financial analyst, a stockbroker, and investment advisor before leaving and becoming a freelance writer and editor. She has written articles on personal money management for Black Enterprise, Essence, Ms., and has written several book reviews for Quarterly Black Review of Books. And she is also written a personal financial book called Talking Dollars and Making Sense, and I can speak about that because I've actually read that and used that particular book, and a wealth building guide for African Americans. So those books are also available. And what I will do at this particular time is present to all of you Brooke Stevens, and she will talk about her book, what encouraged her to write this particular book, and then we'll have question and answers and discussion and discussing some of the various stories, which are wonderful stories that are within the book. So now I present to you Brooke Stevens.
Thank you. This book came about because it was back in the 90s. My grandfather died, and as we were getting ready for the first family reunion after his passing, we had a family newsletter that we would send out about once a year, who's gotten married, who's had kids, who's moved, who's got a new job. So with his passing and all of us being so upset by that, I decided we would write something special for that family newsletter, and I would do a piece about him and how he'd affected my life. And I think at that time there was so much media, because this was back in the 90s. I remember it was a day where all of the news was the O.J. trial, Mel Ryan, a congressman out of Chicago who had molested one of his office people. Mike Tyson was in the news for going to jail, and somebody else was getting shot and dragged to jail. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? What is all this bad news? Every 5 minutes it was some bad news report about something black men had done, and about the same time, I think the Urban League came out with a report about 2 out of 3 black men are in jail. And I said, I don't know any of them. So we're the guys that really are the ones who help to shape and share our lives. And for me personally, I looked back at my own life and realized that my grandfather was just the beginning of a long chain of wonderful men who have been there for me in so many instances. My father, who was a Tuskegee Airman, and he died. My stepfather, who stepped in and took care of me as if I were his own daughter. And 2 men who had helped to coach me through some of those science and math courses I hated when I was in high school and college. And I realized, like every other woman, sure, I've had my bad luck stories and girl, let me tell you how he done me wrong kind of experiences, but I don't want to focus on that. We keep talking about this trend we're going through of all this ugly negativity about black men, and the whole media is full of it. Just turn on television and you're going to get some kind of bad news story. But I feel like, where's the story about the high school basketball coach who helped some kids stay out of trouble? Where is the story about the English teacher who stays afterwards for hours and helps you with being able to write a paper? Where's the story about the bus driver, the construction worker, all the guys who get up and go to work every day, but they're not doing anything negative and there's no blood in it, so they're not interesting? But I decided to make the effort, and I started out, of course, actually going to bother all of my literary friends, as I call them, because at the time I was published and had been writing a lot of personal finance stuff based upon my career on Wall Street. And what I came to understand, as my friend said, well, you got a big mouth and you know so many people, why don't you do it yourself? Well, if you know me, all you got to do is give me the challenge and my ego gets involved. It's like, oh, okay, all right. Let me send out a few emails and see who I can find. And it just snowballed from there. And from then on, I would say, I just started looking around and made a few phone calls, and I started getting pieces submitted to me. And one thing I want you to understand, none of these are fiction. They're not the fantasy thing of black women who are wishing that they could find a good man and he should be such and such. And if I did find one, I would like him to be, you know, another Denzel or something. You know, some of us have reality checks to set in, so, you know, everybody's not Denzel, but this is a pretty decent guy. And I wanted to give more attention to the positive side of things, because I know for a fact I would not be where I am without some black men who made some sacrifices for me. So starting with that as an acknowledgement, I want to say of the submissions that I got, I had over 400 different women submit material to me. I could have done 3 books if I wanted to, which I found fascinating. And when I look at the quality of what I got, you know, we also have this statistic that says there's so many single mothers around and that so many black men abandon their families. Well, I would find that very hard to believe, because over 200 of the pieces that I received were from women who wanted to write about their fathers and what their fathers had done for them, how they had helped them, or a stepfather who had stepped in and taken care of them. One piece I think I'll read for you.
I'm glad you're saying that, because I was going to ask you, but I also wanted you to talk about your grandfather, because that's one of the stories that's in the book. So we want to make sure that she tells
I'll get
us
to
about
him. Don't worry.
her grandfather. Okay.
Don't worry. Don't worry. Granddaddy special.
Okay.
In case if you notice, I put him in the dedication. He's number 1 on my list.
Yes.
How many of you know Michael Eric Dyson? Yes, you all know him. Well, his wife and I are good friends, Marcia, and she wrote this piece about her stepfather, and the title of his, I'll Call Him Daddy. Mama moved to the south side of Chicago after her second summer visiting there with Aunt Sis, her mother's only sister. The dazzling lights and late night street life lured Mama away from her small hometown of Brazil, Indiana, near Terre Haute. Her round baby face, little pug nose, chubby cheeks, and dancing eyes caught a lot of attention. So did her full hips and big, short, beautiful legs hidden by one decent social dress that fit her tight in the waist. She wrote numbers for Aunt Sis. She cooked, cleaned, and ran errands from the big house off Wabash Avenue. It didn't take her long to figure out that her meager earnings from Aunt Sis were just plain slave wages. She freed herself by taking a job for better money with a big policy lord named Buddy. Mama met Daddy, our new daddy, at Buddy's mansion. My father was a ladies' man, a long, skinny, chocolate-colored man named Duke, since he always looked good and was decked out in a new suit every time she saw him. A railroad man by day and a gambler by night, Duke was not one to be committed to long-term relationships. It took 3 years and 2 daughters for Daddy to marry Mama. I was their 3rd daughter, the baby of Duke's girls. He left us before I reached my 2nd birthday. After Duke's departure, Mama took a job at Brown's restaurant, where she worked as a short order cook and waitress 6 days a week. She left and came home to tend us in her chores at the end of her 10-hour shift. She was too busy struggling to worry about how she would manage beyond the immediate moment. Lucky, blessed, I do not know what you would call good fortune when Matthew Perkins Smith, we called him Doc, came into Mama's life. He walked into Brown's one day for a hot meal and left with Mama's address. Shortly after that, he had himself a ready-made family. Doc had never been married, nor had he ever fathered any kids. But he didn't give a second thought to the idea of Mama's past marriage, her brood of girls, or that she had ended her education after 2 years of high school, or that she was 9 years older than he was. After serving several years in the armed forces, Doc had moved from Maysville, Kentucky to Chicago to attend the Illinois College of Podiatry. He worked full-time at the Chicago post office to put himself through school. He was tall, brown, and handsome. His thick, coarse hair formed waves that flowed back off his face. His bushy eyebrows graced deep-set dark eyes that danced. A heavy mustache framed a voluptuous mouth that generated gentle smiles and boisterous laughter. He looked frail next to Mama with her thick, short body. And she goes on to talk about how he had put her through school, he got her out of trouble, and ultimately when they all found out that Duke died, her biological father, it ended up with Doc being the one who helped to pay for Duke's funeral. And when she sat there at the eulogy, she says at the end that to feel secure, she reached back for Doc's hand to feel that she really did still have a father in her life. And I think one of the wonderful things for me in doing this book, I got to know secrets about people that I had been around for such a long time, and the fun thing for me was to realize that we all have so much more to reveal in becoming friends. And I'm talking about a woman by the name of Fatima Sheikh, where she writes in this book about her father, who was half black and half Arab, and they would go to Canada every summer because he wanted to get his degree in engineering. And she said that, and this was the revelation for me, I have known Fatima for years. We were neighbors. She's also a fellow writer. If you look up her name, Fatima Sheikh, S-H-A-I-K, you'll find that she's done several children's books. She's from New Orleans, a city that I absolutely love. And we had worked together on some book projects together. And when I told her I was doing this, she said, "Oh yes, I've got a wonderful thing I'd like to share with you about my father." She didn't realize that in her writing about her father being an engineer and in aviation engineering, he ended up being one of the aviation engineers at Tuskegee, and he knew my father. And it was awesome. I mean, I had to sit down in tears with her one day, and I said, I just want to talk to him. So I ended up having sort of an adopted second father through her father, because he became a wonderful person for me and a resource so that I could get more information and learn about what their lives were like. So, and you want me to talk, well, no.
All right. Well, we can see if anyone, because I'm sure that a number of people have read the book and maybe have read the stories, and see if there's any comments or questions that anyone has up to this particular point.
I had one. When you received these, did you edit them a bit, or did you rewrite any of them?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, Bob, because there was one lady. Most of these I did not do any special rewriting. I accepted them as they are because I had to take the literary, it's got to be finished and ready to go to the typesetter, because I had to narrow this down to 30 different pieces. That was the limit. And I had a page count, but I also, publishers make their rules about how they want things done. So if you're doing a collection, they want at least a dozen of the pieces to be brand new, but they also want a dozen to be from writers that people already know about. So in the process of getting this done, I found many people wanted to do something, but they couldn't write well. And I usually did not make the exception, but in this case, there was a lady, I don't know how she managed to find me, but I guess being in the New York phone book, some people were smart enough to look me up. And she called me, and I'll just introduce her from what she wrote. Her name is Lillian G. Allen, and Miss Allen wrote, I am 87 years old. I spent most of my life working in some white woman's kitchen, cooking and cleaning, and doing somebody else's laundry. My husband left me and my daughter Carolyn when she was 3 years old, so I cleaned and saved enough until I could open up my own beauty salon. All the years of working, and the best job I have ever done was raising my grandson, Reese. I see him infrequently now. When I do, I remember the mischievous little boy he once was, speeding around my beauty salon on his tricycle, causing my patrons to hastily draw in their feet. One customer just stopped coming. Said she loved my work, but she couldn't stand that boy, that dog, that bicycle, and that noise. Well, the wonderful thing about this, and I have to be honest and let you know, Miss Lillian couldn't really write. But she wanted so badly to do this piece about her grandson and to be published somewhere before she died. I mean, you know, when your phone rings and somebody says, hello, my name is Lillian Allen. I'm calling you from Philadelphia, and I know you're doing this book, and before I die, I want to publish something. Can you help me? How do you say no to that? So I said, well, okay, now, what do you have in mind? Well, I want to talk about my grandson, and that's really how this got done. I had a phone at the time which was set up a journalist where you could tape any conversations or interviews you did, and you didn't have to tell anybody at that time. And what we did was, I said, okay, you mail me your notes and the pages you've done. So I went through what she had done, and I typed it for her. I mean, I got handwritten notebook paper. But I figured at 87 you could make some concessions to people. So she sent me her notes, and I laid out an outline and some questions. And I think we got on the phone one day and spent about 3 hours with me asking her questions, interviewing her, getting all of this information from her, and all of the quotes and things she wanted me to know. And I really wrote this for her. And I felt like this was my gift to somebody who had a passion but didn't have the skills and talent to do it. Because, you know, everybody out there wants to write a book. We all think that we are able to tell stories. And some people, they can talk a good story, but they can't write it. So what I did for her was actually let her talk to me on the phone for about 3 hours. And I ended up creating this piece for her. And she was so happy. In fact, of all the writers who are in the book, she's the one who did the best PR to promote the book. She went to the Philadelphia Inquirer and said, here, I wrote a book. You got to interview me.
Brooke, I wouldn't have known that if you hadn't indicated that, but that's a great story. So I think that you need to go on and tell them about her son, because this is the story that's called My Special Agent. And I'm going to let you tell the story and then finish telling the story rather than me telling the story, and then I'll tell you why I asked you to do that.
Oh, okay. Well, you want me to go through the whole piece?
I think that, because you said you interviewed her and you interviewed, the
Yes.
two of you spoke, but did you ever interview her son?
No, I didn't.
And did he know
I never
that he
met
was
him.
being written,
He
her
didn't even know
grandson?
it.
Did he
No,
know that he
her
was
grandson-
being written
no.
about?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Well, I'll read you a little bit of what she said about him. Reese was about 6 when Sister Agnes from the Carlo Catholic School nearby, one of his teachers, called me to say he was wearing a watch that belonged to another classmate. When questioned, Reese said he had found it. The teacher said the owner of the watch had placed it under a radiator while swimming. Reese's mother took off from work the next day and went to school along with him. In front of the whole class, she made him return the watch and admit that he had picked it up. He never stole again. Reese was a happy, inquisitive child, always asking questions until it would just tire me out. At 4 or 5, he would tell his playmates, ask my grandma, she knows everything. Around 13, he changed his mind about all that. Then he would say, don't ask grandma, she's gonna send you to the dictionary. That was my grandmother too. Well, it goes on to tell you about his life growing up, how he got into karate and how he started to goof off, and she was worried that he was going to flunk out of high school. But the truth is, he eventually grew up and found police work, and now he is a Secret Service agent. So he's part of Obama's contingent, I think.
And the reason I wanted her to indicate that, because now she was stating when she's looking at TV with coverage of the president or any kind of diplomat, she's looking to see if she could see him.
Her son,
And
her
it's
grandson.
Her grandson. And the reason I was asking that, or asked you to indicate that, is because when I was in college, I had friends who became Secret Service agents. And I would do the same thing. You turned on the TV, it didn't make any difference. It was the president, the vice president, secretary of state. It didn't matter who it was. We were looking, trying to see if we could find our friends who were the Secret Service agents. And naturally, you could never tell people who they were because they're not supposed to be known. But we look and like, why aren't you looking at these people? We're trying to find. And actually, 2 years ago, I went back to Philly and we got together with Steve. So Steve has since. He has since retired, but it was really kind of interesting, and that really hit home when I read that, and she was so excited about her grandson and looking for him. I said, not only do you look for him because he's your grandson, but when we have friends that are in certain kinds of professions, we do the same thing. We're looking, trying to find them also. But you indicated you had 400, and you had to narrow it down to 30, and then you divided into the various categories. It's fathers and grandfathers and special mentors and etc.
Yeah.
How did you determine how many pieces in each category? If you have 400, how do you narrow it down to 30? And let's eliminate of the 400 the ones that you knew that you weren't, that the people who couldn't write. So let's say we're down to 200. How did you then determine which you were going to select, and then how many for each of those categories, and then how did you pick the particular stories?
Well, that's a good question because it really was a lot of work, and you're right. The easiest thing to do when you get submissions like that is, and I'll tell you a bad secret about the publishing business, and when you get in a position like this of, I am an editor, I have power, I can reject somebody. The easiest thing you do is you say, read the first 2 pages and, can't write. That one's out of here. Next! So you really look at the quality of the writing. And I did have 2 people who worked with me on this. And first, I did my first pick of what was there. Well, I still had about 75, 80 pieces, and I had to get rid of 50. So I wanted to have a minimum, an absolute minimum of 3 in each category. You know, 3 fathers and grandfathers. Well, I think I ended up with 5 or 6 there. Brothers and best friends, mentors, best friends, teachers. There's about 5 there. So I think I probably have about 5 in each category. And the real thing was to find something unique and interesting, but normal, down-to-earth, everyday kind of people that we could all relate to or know somebody like that. And that was the process for me, and having 2 other people to sort of share the blame, because that's what it is, you know. If you wanted to, I could have done another book, but I didn't really want to. I felt like this was enough. And the unfortunate thing is the publishing business, now, the response I got from my publisher, we don't know how to sell this. So instead of making the effort, guess what? They did nothing.
No, why was it they didn't know how to sell it? They didn't know what genre it should be a part of? Is that what the issue was?
Well, they wanted it to be a romance book, and you know, there's a whole drama around the cover that happened because I was away on vacation. I submitted all of this stuff. I was in a writer's residency up in Seattle, and you know, the one thing about a writer's residency, you can get away from the world and you can do your work, but they hold your phone calls for like 2 or 3 days, so you're not bothered. And it's nice to be detached from the world sometimes, but not when it's your publisher calling. So they called up and they said, we're going to email you a photograph that we have chosen for the cover. I'm like, okay. Well, it took me about 4 or 5 days to get it. When they showed me what they had in mind, it was a father holding a baby. Okay, that's fine, but this book is not about fathers and daughters. There's another book like that already out there. Well, what do you want? I went around, looked for some covers, but it's hard to find what you're looking for in Seattle. I went online. I did find a beautiful photograph of a man and woman together, but the person who did it wouldn't give me the rights. So, you know, you go through that kind of argument. And the publisher's getting antsy, we're getting closer to production deadline, and they're saying, you know, you've got 3 days to find something. Well, that was the end of my residency. I flew back to New York, and I just got on the phone and called absolutely every photographer I had met. I had worked in television, I had worked in print, so I knew people, and I just called everybody for about 3 hours, set up appointments, and ran all over the city. And the wonderful thing is, some people really know how to listen. Listen carefully to what you're asking for. I said, I'm looking for a photograph to use for my book cover. And what I want it to be is some kind of gesture or image that conveys warmth and affection between a man and a woman. I don't want romance. I don't want some woman grabbing and hugging her man from the side, or a father and daughter. Just a simple gesture of love and affection. And, you know, God is good. He makes you work for it sometimes. I saw about 6 photographers in one day starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. Anybody knows me knows 8 o'clock is, you know, hell for me to get up. But I went through all kinds of portfolios. And by the end of the day, I had one person left, and I was getting so discouraged I wanted to go home. But I said, no, okay, I'm going to go. Hugh Bell, nice older guy, and I had known him when he worked at Essence, and I had written there. I went by, and what really made me want to turn around and go home is he lived on a 3rd floor loft. A walk up. And when we say loft, we're not talking 12 steps. We're talking 18, 20 steps per floor. I mean, I was puffing by the time I got there. And I remember all the other photographers had, you know, like dozens of photographs spread out across the table. And I walked into Hugh's studio. And after he gave me a glass of water and let me sit down and catch my breath, I looked over in the table and there was one picture. And it was this one. I said, oh my God, yes. You listened. You understood what I asked for. And because that woman's hand looks a little bit lighter in the original photograph, the publisher decided that they were going to darken it because the original photograph is not nearly this dark. I said, why did you do that? Well, we were afraid people would think it was a white woman's hand. I'm like, here we go with the racism. But it said exactly what I wanted. It conveys the kind of affection. This could be a mother and son, this could be a husband and wife, this could be a brother and sister, a best friend. So yes, I wanted the gesture to simply indicate a warm, affectionate relationship between 2 people.
And I think he captured that.
Yes, he did. Well, he was an older guy who really had been in the business a long time, and I was impressed that he picked one picture and it was perfect. Mm-hmm.
Now, for those of you who may have read some of the various stories, is there a particular story that you would like Brooke to make comments about? Is there a particular story you would like Brooke to talk about? So I wanted to give you an opportunity, so I wasn't mentioning all the stories that I like most.
But which one did you like most, other than my little brother Jimmy?
If any of you heard NPR, when did we do that? Thursday morning?
Thursday morning.
Thursday morning. And I talked a little bit about my little brother because there's a little girl that says, her mother says to her, I have a gift for you, or I will have a gift for you. And she's thinking it's this little red tricycle that she's been looking at, and they've passed it as they've been walking up and down the street, etc. And her mother comes home and it's a baby. So she has a little brother. So, and she was 10 or so? Six. Thank you. See, you all right. I don't have to tell the story. You all have to tell the story. So at 6, and she has a little brother. So that was really not her idea of a gift whatsoever. That was not a present. And in fact, I kept reading, and the portion of the story that made me really like this one is when she and her brother were going to school, I believe, and there's a woman who says, "Oh, he's such a cute little boy," and "Oh, he's so nice," and she's thinking, "Good, you can have him." So she leaves her brother with this stranger at the bus stop, and she goes across the street, and she just leaves him there. And I'm thinking, she really did not want to have a little brother. And he was, when I say relatively big, he was how old by then, about 4 or so?
He was about 5.
Okay, by 5. So she's leaving him on the street corner with some strange person. But when she turns around and she looks at the expression in his face and the fact that he's crying and he's mortified that she is leaving him. So then she turns around and she goes back to get her brother, other than the fact that, her mother would have killed her if
she got home without him.
Came home without her little brother. But it was that portion of the story that just, to me, captured how we feel when we have siblings that we really do want to get rid of them. But then you keep reading the story, and then Brooke can fill in, or those of you who know the story and corrected me on my portion can fill in. By the time you get to the end of the story, she's talked about the various things that she and her brother have gone through life. And when she gets to the end, her brother is the one that she loves most, and that's the person she can confide in, etc. So I also took, there's many times we'll read something and we'll put ourselves in various stories. You may not do that, but when I'm reading, many times I'll put myself in the story. And it's really interesting because I have 2 brothers. And it's interesting that people will say, my brother, they think that there's a closeness between my brother and I, but they usually get the wrong brother. And it's not that I'm not close with both of my brothers, but it's the one that seems least like me. That's the one that I'm closest to. And I will call him anytime something is going on, and he's still in Pennsylvania and I'm here. And he and I will talk about things that my brother, who lives right here in Jacksonville, that we don't talk about. So it was really kind of interesting when you said that. And I can remember, since I'm the older, I remember teasing him as a little kid and calling him names and all those kinds of things. So when it got to the end and it said, my brother and I are so close, I thought about my brother and thought about the fact that as soon as something happens within the family, I call him and he calls me. But people who know my siblings and I, they think the one here is the one that I'm closest to. But I think it's probably because he lives here, so people may see us. But it's really the one that doesn't live here that we talk to each other a lot more.
I tell you what I like most about that piece. There's 2 parts of it which were hilarious to me. One where she says, okay, well, he's here, and Mom used to do a lot of babysitting for other people, but they always went home. So after about 10 days, she goes to her mother and says, when is he going back home? And she said, I didn't like the answer I got. And the honest part of this piece that I really like is when she met the woman that he decided to marry.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. She was honest. Here's a black woman whose brother decides he's going to marry an Irish woman. And she did everything she could to make them miserable. She was mean. She was rude. She asked them about a restaurant that they would go to, and she took them to a restaurant where she knew that her brother was allergic to the food. And she did everything she could to be a bitch. And she finally realized, no, I guess this isn't going to work. And her answer, she did confront him in a way that I think a lot of black women would like to. She says, after you've known me and grown up with me and seen what all of the women in your family are like, how could you go out and marry a white woman? And his answer was the most honest thing I have ever heard, because she didn't come to me with an agenda of stuff I had to fix first. I'm like, oh, okay. That's something to think about. Yes.
What I like best about that story was she felt guilty all her life about leaving him at the bus station. And then at
Yes.
the end, when she apologized, he doesn't
He
even
didn't remember.
Yes.
He didn't remember.
That's true, yeah. But well, the last line that I like, she said, you know, the unique thing about this relationship is he has been the witness to all of the different phases of her life and all the different changes in personality, things that she has gone through, and he is the only person who can get away with saying some of the things that she may need to hear that would get the rest of the world slapped if they tried to tell her that. But she will listen to him in a way that she will not listen to anyone else. And I think that's where we all have brothers that we can do that with. They can tell us something. And in fact, I think she said that his wife told her, you know, he listens to you in a way that he won't listen to me. So I think that's the unique thing about brothers and sisters. Yes, anyone
Jennifer,
else?
someone else have another story? And I loved his story. Oh, Jennifer, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The first story I read, because the book just broke there, was Granddaddy.
Oh.
Your grandfather.
Yes.
And, you know, as I read it, it was interesting to me that when I was reading, I felt like you had known him all your life, and then it's only as I read on that I realized he had come into your life later.
I didn't meet him until I was 33.
And that was just amazing to me. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about some of those instant connections, because there was this sort of instant acceptance, a spiritual connection between you that was just, and the fact that you had to sort of go off by yourself after the funeral said to me that this was somebody who was really, really special to you. So maybe you could talk about those types of connections.
Well, I'll give you a little background on this, and I'll read from a part of it. Until I was 16 and needed to get my birth certificate for my driver's license, my mother hadn't bothered to tell me that the man I had been calling Daddy all my life wasn't. She didn't exactly lie, but she never really explained either. After she told me the truth, my questions about my real father were answered with slammed doors, an icy stare across her coffee cup, and a very firm, "That's none of your business." We've all heard that from our family, right? We fell into a carefully choreographed silence, but I never stopped wanting to know. I got bits and pieces of information in furtive talks with other relatives who exchanged shocked glances when they realized how little I knew. After I went away to college, I spent less and less time at home, and after graduating, I didn't bother to participate in any of this dance of denial anymore. I created a life for myself away from here. Finally, in the summer of 1974, I went looking for my father's family. I'd had enough of the rumors, half-truths, and vague whispers that just led to more questions. I had spent a weekend in North Carolina with my Aunt Nell, Mom's oldest sister, who had shared a few secrets with me. After about 6 vodka tonics, we got around to the hardcore subject at hand, and she told me enough for me to know that it was worth a trip to Alabama. On a hot Saturday morning in July, I flew to Mobile and rented a car. I crossed the Tennessee River around 11 o'clock and headed up Route 65, flying past tall pine trees, red clay hills, and small towns with funny names I'd never heard before. Satsuma, Bay Minette, Perdido, Atmore, Uriah. They meant absolutely nothing to me. I wasn't searching for a favorite tree, an old schoolhouse, or some special setting to trigger a fond memory. I wanted a living, breathing testimony to my past. A live human being who could tell me more about myself than I could ever imagine wanting to know. I was looking for me. Around 1, I reached the center of the small town and shivered, thinking, my God, this could have been home. It was Hicktown, USA, redneck country, Alabama style. The courthouse was the usual red brick with gold dome and coal tower in the middle of the town square. Somewhere inside it, I was sure, were the records of my short life here. My birth certificate, the divorce decree, a death certificate, and a custody suit. Dusty pickup trucks parked at angles along the 4 blocks that made up Main Street, in front of the post office, the general store, the bank, the library, the hardware store, and the jewelers. Except for an occasional Toyota or Honda, it could have still been 1949 there. Maybe Mother did me a favor coming back to get me. I found the nearest payphone and local directory in a small grocery store. I had only my father's name to go on. Charles Stevens Jr. Maybe there was a Charles Stevens Sr. Would he still be alive? Oh my God, he could probably be at least 80. I suddenly had visions of a senile old coot in a rocking chair, drooling tobacco, spitting on himself, and gazing out into a vague past that he could not share with me. Then I saw his name at the top of the page. I stopped for a long moment, wondering what I would say. How do you walk into a stranger's life and introduce yourself as a long-lost grandchild? Would he remember me, or worse, would he care? I took a deep breath and mumbled a silent prayer before I dialed the number. I noticed that I couldn't stop my fingers from shaking. He answered after the 3rd ring. Mr. Stevens, did you have a son who was a Tuskegee Airman who died in a plane crash? I asked. The question came out of nowhere. Silence. Mr. Stevens? My voice quivered. Yes, he said cautiously. Why do you ask? I want to be sure that I have the right person. Okay. So what's all that to you? If that's true, then that makes me your granddaughter, I whispered. I heard a quick, sharp intake of breath on the other end. Oh my God, had I given him a heart attack? And then he spoke. Marilyn, he said softly. Is that you, Marilyn? I blushed and giggled and burst into tears trying to find the words. This man knew me. Only close family members ever called me by my middle name. Where are you? He said. I'm over here at the grocery store, the Piggly Wiggly, out there in front of the courthouse. Oh my God, he shouted in my ear. I'm on my way. I'm driving a yellow Ford, and slammed down the phone. My mind raced while I waited. Oh God, what have I done? What am I doing standing here in the sweltering heat of a small Alabama town in God knows where country, where I might have spent my whole life here. Now I'm waiting for some faceless stranger I don't know and wondering how different things might have been if I'd grown up here. Well, what do I call him? Grandpa? Grandfather? Mr. Stevens sounds much too formal. Will I like him? Even more important, will he like me? And what is Mother going to say? Whatever happened at this meeting, I knew I could never go back to being who I was before now. Within minutes, a rusty-fendered old yellow Ford caked with red clay dust pulled into the parking lot. Out stepped this tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in khakis and wearing a wide-brimmed straw farmer's hat. He had strong, bright eyes, thick gray hair, and a joyful smile across his ruddy face. So this is what a grandfather looks like. I didn't know what to say. My feet were frozen. I couldn't move. I'd never had a grandfather to talk to before. I waved to him, feeling too shaky to step out. And he saw me. Without a word, he crossed that distance between us with a quick, lanky stride, and before I could say anything, he picked me up in his arms as if I were still the 4-year-old girl who had been taken away from him more than 25 years before. He crushed me to his chest, laughing and crying for at least 10 minutes as he kept saying over and over again, "Thank you, God. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now I can die happy. All of my babies have come back home." Wrapped in those strong arms and caressed by the calloused hands of this huge, loving stranger, I was humbled to realize that there was someone in the world who loved me completely without knowing anything about me because I was family. When I looked into his eyes, I saw that I had never left his heart. I had no idea who this man was, but I knew I was finally home.